In late December 1942, 2nd Lieutenant John George arrived at Guadalcanal with the 132nd Infantry Regiment carrying something unusual in his footlockers: a partially written manuscript about rifle ballistics. George was 27 years old. He had enlisted in the Illinois National Guard in 1940 as a private specifically to shoot on the unit's rifle team. By 1941, he held a second lieutenant's commission. But his real credential wasn't his rank. It was his obsession with understanding exactly why bullets behaved the way they did. Before the war, George had been a competitive shooter. Not just a good shot, but someone who kept meticulous records. He logged atmospheric conditions, measured groups to the thousandth of an inch, tested ammunition lots for consistency. He understood that precision shooting wasn't about talent. It was about systematic observation and technical knowledge. He had wanted to bring his personal Winchester Model 70 sporting rifle to the Pacific. The rifle represented everything he believed about precision: a properly bedded action, a quality barrel, good trigger, and most importantly, a scope that actually allowed you to see what you were shooting at. But a friend had borrowed the rifle before deployment and damaged the bore using corrosive ammunition. Winchester hadn't finished replacing the barrel when George shipped out. Instead, George carried what the Army issued: a Springfield 1903 rifle fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope. The Lyman was a 2.5x hunting scope, modest magnification by target shooting standards, but significantly better than iron sights. More importantly, it represented something George believed the military didn't fully appreciate: that you couldn't hit what you couldn't properly see. The 132nd Infantry had arrived to relieve the Marine units that had fought on Guadalcanal since August. The situation they inherited was complex. Major Japanese forces were withdrawing, but they'd left behind trained snipers in the hills northwest of Henderson Field. These weren't random shooters. They were specialists who understood concealment, patience, and the psychological impact of selective targeting. The standard American response to sniper fire was overwhelming call in artillery: saturate the area with machine gun fire, send in infantry to clear the position. This worked when you could afford the ammunition and time. But it also meant that a single hidden rifleman could tie up dozens of men and hundreds of pounds of ordnance. George looked at the problem differently. He saw it as a technical challenge, not unlike the precision shooting problems he'd worked on back in Illinois. If you could locate the sniper's position through careful observation, estimate the range accurately, account for environmental factors, and deliver a single well-aimed shot, you could eliminate the threat without massive resource expenditure. His company commander authorized him to try. During periods when enlisted men were on work details, George would take his Springfield with the Lyman scope and hunt Japanese positions. Not for glory or kill counts. He was testing theories about what was actually possible with the equipment American soldiers had. The jungle northwest of Henderson Field became his laboratory. This story isn't about Hollywood heroics. It's about how technical observation changed military doctrine. If you want more stories about the individuals whose detailed notes influenced how wars were fought, subscribe now. We're finding these accounts in military archives before they're forgotten. George's approach to counter sniper work was methodical in a way that frustrated officers who wanted immediate results. A typical operation would begin before dawn. George would position himself with good observation of terrain where Japanese snipers had been active. Then he would wait, not waiting for a target to appear, waiting to understand the terrain. Through his 2.5x Lyman scope, he would study the jungle canopy for hours. At this magnification, he could resolve details at 400 yards that were invisible to the naked eye. He was building a mental map of the area, which trees had branched structures that could support a man's weight, which positions offered clear fields of fire toward American positions, where the natural concealment was most effective. This was the part that couldn't be rushed. Most soldiers saw jungle as an undifferentiated mass of vegetation. George saw it as a three-dimensional problem with specific solutions. A sniper needed certain things: structural support, concealment, clear sight lines, escape routes. That limited the possibilities. In one early operation, reconstructed here from the type of engagements George described in his notes, he identified a likely position in a large tree approximately 450 yards distant. The tree's branch structure and position relative to American patrol routes made it ideal for interdiction. George observed the position for hours until he saw what he was looking for, a discrete movement lasting perhaps 2 seconds. Not wind-moving foliage, but something shifting against the natural pattern. He estimated range at 450 yards. The shot was upward at perhaps 30 degrees. This created a ballistics problem. Shooting at steep angles changed how gravity affected bullet trajectory. The slant distance and the horizontal distance weren't the same, which meant his bullet wouldn't drop as much as a level shot at the same range. George adjusted his point of aim based on principles he'd learned in competitive shooting and fired. He later noted in his observations that the first shot struck the tree, but not the target. His range estimation had been slightly off. But the shot had an effect. The position revealed itself through violent movement in the foliage. A second shot connected, and a body fell from the tree. George remained in position for another 2 hours, observing. This was critical. If there was a second sniper, and Japanese doctrine often used paired positions, he would eventually reveal himself, trying to confirm his partner's fate. No second man appeared. This became George's pattern: long observation periods, careful analysis of likely positions, patient waiting for the micro movements or pattern disruptions that revealed human presence. Then single, calculated shots at ranges that most officers believed were impossible in jungle conditions. In another reconstructed scenario based on George's technical notes, he identified a ground-level position more than 1,000 yards from American supply routes. This exceeded official Army doctrine for effective rifle range. But George understood that effective range was a function of ability to observe and accurately estimate distance as much as raw ballistic capability. He positioned himself with clear line of sight and waited. Hours passed. Then, late in the observation period, he saw grass move, not swaying with wind, but a discrete disturbance caused by something pushing through from below. George calculated the shot. Range over 1,000 yards meant bullet drop of 35-40 feet. The target area was minimal, a prone human form viewed from an oblique angle. He fired and watched his impact fall short. But the shot forced a reaction. The target broke cover and ran for the tree line. George cycled his bolt, led the moving target to account for the 1,000-second bullet flight time, and fired again. The figure dropped. These engagements taught George specific technical lessons. First, magnification mattered more than doctrine suggested. His 2.5x Lyman scope allowed target identification at ranges where iron sights were useless. He began making detailed notes about what higher magnification might achieve. Second, accurate range estimation was the critical skill. All the marksmanship ability in the world meant nothing if you misjudged distance by 100 yards. George developed techniques for using terrain features and known measurements to estimate ranges more accurately. Third, environmental factors, temperature, humidity, altitude, wind, affected bullet performance more at extended ranges than most soldiers understood. George kept detailed notes about atmospheric conditions during each engagement. Fourth, patience was a weapon system. Japanese snipers operated on the assumption that Americans wouldn't wait them out. By remaining in position for 6 to 8 hours, observing continuously, George could identify positions that would otherwise remain invisible. The physical toll was significant. Hours of remaining motionless in humid jungle heat. Insects. The mental strain of sustained observation. Operating alone, often far from friendly positions. But George was gathering data. By early February 1943, George's observations had demonstrated something important. The Army's doctrinal assumptions about effective range for individual rifles in jungle terrain were too conservative. With proper optics and technique, soldiers could engage targets at distances that gave those targets no opportunity for effective counter. In early February 1943, the tactical situation changed abruptly. Japanese forces, preparing for their final withdrawal from Guadalcanal, launched a series of attacks to cover their evacuation. George found himself in a role he hadn't trained for. A company was attempting to hold a ridge position against coordinated Japanese assault. The company commander needed someone who could hit specific targets at extended ranges during active combat. This was completely different from methodical counter, sniper work, multiple threats, time pressure, friendly forces in close proximity, incoming fire. George had to make rapid engagements at ranges between 400 and 750 yards under conditions that made precision shooting extremely difficult. The targets were tactically significant: squad leaders directing troop movements, machine gun teams establishing positions, mortar crews ranging in on American positions. Each successful shot disrupted Japanese coordination and bought time for American defensive preparations. George fired approximately 60 rounds over a 3-hour period, more ammunition than he'd expended in all his previous counter-sniper operations combined. He later estimated a hit rate around 70%, though confirming hits during active combat was difficult. During the engagement, shrapnel from a Japanese mortar round struck George in the left shoulder and upper arm. The wounds weren't life-threatening, but they affected his ability to maintain steady aim. He continued engaging targets for another 20 minutes before blood loss forced him to withdraw for medical treatment. The company held the ridge. Japanese forces withdrew that afternoon. George's role in this engagement revealed something he would later write about extensively: the gap between the controlled conditions of competitive shooting and the chaos of combat. All the technical knowledge in the world had to be adapted to situations where you couldn't take time for perfect range estimation, where you couldn't wait for ideal atmospheric conditions, where the consequence of missing wasn't a lost trophy but friendly casualties. The wounds required 2 weeks of recovery. When George returned to duty in late February, the Japanese were completing their withdrawal from Guadalcanal. The battle for the island was effectively over. George spent his remaining time on Guadalcanal doing what he'd been doing all along: observing, taking notes, and thinking about what he'd learned. John George survived the war. He served with the U.S. Army from 1941 to 1947, including later service with Merrill's Marauders in Burma, and held the rank of lieutenant colonel when demobilized. After demobilization in 1947, George didn't write a memoir about his heroic combat exploits. Instead, he wrote a 400-page technical manual titled "Shots Fired in Anger," a rifleman's eye view of the activities on the island of Guadalcanal. The book was unlike any other combat memoir of its era. George devoted entire chapters to ammunition performance, barrel wear patterns, scope mounting techniques, trigger pull measurements, and atmospheric effects on bullet trajectory. He included detailed technical evaluations of Japanese weapons he'd captured and tested. He analyzed why certain rifle designs worked better than others in jungle conditions. The book contained minimal drama, no heroic narratives, no kill counts, just page after page of careful technical observation, written by someone who viewed combat as an extended field test of equipment and doctrine. Military marksmanship instructors read it and recognized something important. Here was someone who had actually tested doctrinal assumptions under combat conditions and documented what he'd found. His notes about the importance of optical quality challenged assumptions about whether high magnification scopes were worth their weight and complexity. The influence was gradual but measurable. In the years following World War II, the Army revised its effective range estimates for scope, equipped rifles. The official maximum effective range for sniper rifles increased from 600 yards to 1,000 yards by the early 1950s. This change was based substantially on combat reports like George's. The emphasis on scope quality and magnification increased. George's reports demonstrated that optical quality mattered more than many believed. Standard scope magnification for military rifles increased from 2.5x to 8x in the 1950s, then to 10x by the mid-1960s. The Army began allowing selected personnel to use specialized equipment when mission requirements justified it. While standardization remained important, there was growing recognition that expert marksmen with properly equipped rifles could achieve results impossible with standard issue equipment. In 1981, the NRA published an expanded edition of Shots Fired in Anger that included George's observations from Burma, where he'd served with Merrill's Marauders. The book remained continuously in print and became required reading for serious students of military marksmanship. Lieutenant Colonel John George died in 2009 at age 90. He had spent his post-war career as an academic and diplomat, earning highest honors at Princeton, studying at Oxford, and working on African affairs for the State Department. He rarely discussed his military service except in technical terms. His legacy isn't measured in confirmed kills or dramatic combat actions. There is no monument to John George. No battle was named after him. His name appears infrequently in popular histories of Guadalcanal, but his influence is visible in every modern military sniper scope, in every long-range marksmanship manual that emphasizes environmental factors and range estimation, in every doctrinal document that treats precision shooting as a technical skill rather than natural talent. George's contribution wasn't what he killed. It was what he observed, documented, and taught. The lesson is this: sometimes the most important thing a soldier can do in combat isn't to fight heroically, but to think carefully, to observe what works and what doesn't, to document it with technical precision, and to share that knowledge so others can build on it. 700 pages of technical notes written in a jungle laboratory. That's what changed American marksmanship doctrine. Not because the story was dramatic, but because the observations were true. If you found this valuable, subscribe. There are more stories about the people who changed how wars were fought through technical expertise rather than heroics. And if you want to share, where are you watching from? Does your family have military history? Have you ever encountered someone whose careful observations changed how your field worked? The comment section is below. These stories matter because they show that war isn't just about courage. It's also about careful thinking under pressure. Let's make sure those thinkers are remembered.